John Acosta, and I'll be presenting a short history of the train of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico used to have a train that went around the island along the coast about 100 years ago, up to 50 years ago, and it was one of the biggest feats of engineering achieved by that time in the island. It was at some point the main means of transportation in the island. And I'll be giving you a short history about this train and the effects it had in the country, in the culture and economy. And in the collection of information, I used many sources, but the four main ones were Contexto Histórico del Ferrocarril e Inventario del Ferrocarril, written by Dr. Pumarada, he was a professor in our university in the 1970s and 1980s. The second main source I used was Enciclopedia de Puerto Rico, which contained many different articles written by many different authors. The third main source I used was Redescubriendo Puerto Rico, which is a blog, a site for blogs. Someone posts just articles about the train mainly, but also in general the history of Puerto Rico. So I found very useful information there, including a map that contains all of the pieces of infrastructure that are still surviving of the train. So you can use this map to find these places and go visit them, literally. The fourth source I used was Wikipedia, of course, and then the rest of the sources, which were many, I used for just to confirm the accuracy of the information I found in these main sources to see if they correlate, and then also to get more images and videos, which I will be using throughout the speech in the video. So how did my interest in this train begin? When I was a kid walking in the beach, around 5 years old, when I was about 5 years old, I saw some old bridges and in a dirt path that went through the middle of the forest. And I was curious about it because it didn't make sense to me. Why is this here? You know, there's nothing here. And my parents told me, oh, a train used to pass through here. And I became very curious about the people who built the train and their lives and about what it was like to be in the past and history and all that. And that's how my interest in this train began, and in history in general also. Interest in history in general. So what is the origin of this train? How did it begin? Where did it come from? Who decided to build it and why? Well, in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 19th century, you have the development of the train of railroad systems going on in Europe and North America. And this is in correlation or as a result of the Industrial Revolution, which was also happening in those regions mainly, or started in those regions. And eventually, the use of the railroad, because it was so beneficial, spread out to different parts of the world, including Central America, the Caribbean. The first country to install railroad systems in the Caribbean was Cuba in 1837. Then Puerto Rico installed its first railroad systems in the 1850s, mostly just private enterprises making use of it for their plantations, sugar cane plantations and coffee plantations mainly. And I will explain why later. But before the use of the trains, the widespread use of the trains, the means of transport in Puerto Rico were mainly consisting of compacted dirt roads that connected the main towns. And these dirt roads were to be maintained by the locals that lived nearby the roads, the townships also, through which the roads passed, and richer people, richer townsfolk, richer members of the town that had to donate money or invest money and donate resources and perhaps also their own workers to help maintain the roads. And but the fact is that most people either didn't have the money to build new roads or maintain the ones already built, or they avoided the work because it didn't bring them any personal benefit. It cost a lot of time and effort and money. And most people just avoided doing it because of those reasons. And as a result, the roads were very few and in bad condition, where just it would rain and it would become impassable very easily, and it was very difficult to cross rivers and smaller streams because there were no bridges, or the bridges were really crude, so you couldn't pass with heavy weights. And so that was the general situation of the infrastructure for traveling in Puerto Rico. And the local government had sent reports to the Spanish government about this situation and requested financial assistance to improve it, and also the investment into the development of a new railroad system. And this was already happening. These requests were being sent in the 1860s, and it wasn't until the 1880s that the Spanish government decided to start investing money into the development of the railroad. 60 years after Cuba, just I don't know why, but interesting. Now, the biggest source of demand for the train wasn't the people; it was the sugarcane industry and the coffee industry. These were the industries. These were the sectors of society that would benefit the most from the train, because the profit margins that they would get as a result of using the train were immense. Because before the train, they were using oxen, and oxen required at least 3 acres of hay to survive, and that's a huge opportunity cost, where they could be using all that land for profitable agriculture, and instead had to use it to maintain the oxen. And these oxen also were slow because they were pulling the carts and they were pulling them in dirt roads or no roads at all. So in the rain, they could become very slow and ineffective. And so those are the reasons why. And also, sugarcane has a time limit before which it starts to decay. After 24 hours of being cultivated, being uprooted or whatever, cut, it needs to be processed before those 24 hours pass, because it starts to decay and lose, and the sugar output that it gives is going to start lowering. Before the train proper, these enterprises started using portable rails, which were a smaller version of the fixed rails that the locomotives use. These portable rails are easy to remove and easy to place where needed. So they're flexible and cheaper, they're smaller, but they can't carry the load of a locomotive. But they can carry the load of a cart and an ox. And on these, an ox can pull a lot more weight. It can pull the weight that would require 10 oxen to pull before. Not only 1 oxen was required. So that saved a lot of money, a lot of opportunity cost. And so that was a huge benefit. And it increased also the speed which they moved. And so that was an immense benefit for these plantations and their profit margins. The main drivers of the construction of the train were the sugar and coffee and industries. Eventually, the government itself began to plan and direct money to the construction of a rail that would go around the island and would benefit more people than just the plantations. In 1880, the local government made a plan to build a train. It would go along the coast of the island. It would be divided into 4 sections. It would cost more than 8 million pesos, $500 million in today's value. Compañía de Ferrocarriles de Puerto Rico was the company to which they auctioned off the rights to manage the construction. This is the Spanish government auctioned off these rights. And so again, they built 4 sections. Section A would be between San Juan and Aguadilla. This section required the biggest constructions of infrastructure, mainly some big tunnels and bridges. They being Túnel de Isabela, Túnel de Quebradillas, Viaducto de Oaxaca, or bridge, and Puente de Quebradillas. These were some of the biggest works of engineering undertaken in the island by that time, excepting the fort of San Juan. Line B would be between Rio Piedras and Macao, passing through Fajardo. Line C would connect Aguadilla and Hormigueros, Line D would connect Ponce and Jalco. Along the way, these rails passed by many sugar and coffee estates, where these estates would connect with their private lines to the main one. Then the Spanish-American War starts in 1898, and construction is interrupted during that period. The United States invades, and there is a military government until 1900, where no work is done, and then the railroad company isn't reconstituted until 1902 under new owners, under new shareholders, and the company was now called American Railroad Company. This new company starts operating in June the 1st, 1902. They had a contract to build, manage, and maintain and operate the railways until 1957. By 1908, San Juan and Ponce were connected by rail, and many other parts of the lines were finished. Between then and 1957, the train would make hundreds of thousands of trips around the island, impacting the culture and economy. Among the cultural effects will be listed soon. The rail became the main means of long distance commercial and personal transport between the local towns. These were the areas where most of the population lived and worked. When trains stopped to restock on water or to change wagon trains, all sorts of local vendors would climb the passenger wagons to sell their wares, usually local foods and other trinkets. Oral traditions and songs and other forms of culture would develop about the train. Train stations became focal points for communities. A lot of economic activity revolved around the comings and goings of passengers and cargoes. Near the stations were hotels, restaurants, financial services, banks, street sellers, cafes, warehouses, and distribution centers. People received and said goodbyes to their loved ones, usually leaving for school and sometimes the military, and for other reasons as well. In larger cities like Mayagüez and Ponce, railways would branch off from the main one to the ports and docks, so they would load and unload goods there. The workshops for the repair and maintenance of trains became important sources of employment and income for the locals where these were located. Now, for many towns, these workshops were the biggest employer. People saw the construction of this train as a sign of progress. The large-scale works, the resources and technical expertise that was called upon for its construction were bigger than most people had ever seen before. They believed that the social and economic progress and economic quality of their lives would increase exponentially from these advancements. Many people felt pride for having worked and on maintaining and building the train and the railways. It was the means to progress for the country to a brighter and better future. A change in direction from centuries of slow progress and stagnation. The days of the train were counted. As the 20th century moved on, the railway started to become economically unfeasible. Income was too low, wages were increasing, partly due to unionizing workers. There was increasing competition from automobiles. The automobiles, part of the reason they were cheaper is because they had to travel less distance, and this is because roads can be built in more places. There's more flexibility in where you can build a road, because you can make sharper turns with a road, and you can go steeper with a road as well. And this increased flexibility decreased the travel distance, decreased the use of fuel, and saved time. So there was clear benefits to the use of automobiles as opposed to trains, and also less time. That's it. So because of this competition, there was lower demand for the train, and the train company had to lower its fees, and therefore had lower income. Another reason for its decline was that a large number of employees were required to to operate and maintain the locomotives and the rails. 1,600 in the harvest season, and this is just for the rails specifically. I don't know how many for maintaining the locomotives. It's entirely different numbers. And for the rails, 1,600 were required in the harvest season, 1,200 for the rest of the year. High maintenance costs of rails and other infrastructure was another factor. They also received no financial assistance from the government. And so bankruptcy soon followed. On August 1st, 1947, plans were being made to sell the company's assets. A payment plan was developed for the shareholders and workers of the company. In 1953, cargo and passenger transports were stopped. On January 1st, 1957, the American Railroad Company was disbanded. To pay their many debts, the assets were auctioned off. This included many metallic structures, all the metallic structures, including most of the bridges, which were dismantled and sold, also all of the rails, and some bridges and some rails were kept by some townships and some sugar and coffee plantations, where they continue to use them in their respective, the townships continue to use them as roads, and plantations sometimes as roads, and sometimes they continue using trains as well. It's still profitable for them to do so. Some sugar plantations we continue to use, the last to operate, the last of the sugar plantations to continue using a train and to operate as well was one called Central Aguirre in Ponce, which continued to operate until the early 2000s. It was partly used, the train they used was partly used as a tourist attraction. People would board the train and see what it was like to be aboard a train in Puerto Rico. And so that's how this train came to an end. In this speech, I introduced you to how my interest for history in general, and this train in particular, began. I talked about the historical context in which the train originated. I talked generally about the planning and construction of the train, about the cultural and economic impact this train had in Puerto Rican society, and lastly, how it later went bankrupt and ceased to operate. Now only stories told by people in their later years, old pictures and videos, some writings, and the many bridges, tunnels, and locomotives around the island, all that are left of this interesting part of our history. I hope you all have acquired a greater appreciation of history in general and the history of this train and of your country in particular. Thank you.